Let's see, we got one guy watching here. We're kind of just waiting on a few people to get in here before we get started. Yeah, we're getting a few more. We got 3 people in here now. Okay, I got 7 o'clock. We're going to get this thing started. I'm Skinny Bee Man, Little Bits Honeybees. We'll try to answer your bee questions tonight. You may stump me, but not everybody knows all there is to know about bees, so we'll see what we come up with. No questions right now. Right this time of year, you guys need to be really concerned about swarming right now. They got a major honey flow on. The bees are building exceptionally fast. Actually, they're getting honey bound. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you know, first signs of them thinking about leaving is getting a lot of drone comb in the box. You know, if you get a half a frame of drone comb on 2 sides of a frame, they're going to think about leaving there in a couple of weeks. So you're either going to have to split them, give them another box, checkerboard them. Just don't set a box on top. They don't look at that as room to expand. You got to move some honey frames up and give that queen some open comb down in the bottom box. If you got drawed comb, they'll make more young bees faster. But like right now, they're bringing in so much honey. I've been putting starter strips in, letting them use some of that honey up, drawing new wax, and that gives you a little more time before you got to do something with them. Nobody got any questions? Ricky, how long does it normally take for a 1 or 2 frame split to build up to sell once you have a mated queen? Well, there's a lot of factors in that. You got the weather is a big factor, and the size of box. I'm making the 1 frame splits in a 2 frame box, and it's compact. They can control the heat better. They build considerable faster than a 5 frame, 8 or 10 frame. But you can take a piece of styrofoam or a piece of plywood and make you a follower board and cut the size down so they can control the heat better. But typically on your answer, on a 1 frame split, if everything's right, it takes about 5 to 6 weeks before they're ready to sell as a nuke. Justin wants to know what the latest in the year you can make a split. Well, a lot of ifs on that question. The answer to the question, true answer, is you can make a split the last day they fly. in winter. If you've got a mated queen, you have enough honey in stores for them to put in that box and enough bees to put in that box, you can make a split the last day they'll fly, and they'll make just fine through the winter if you give them everything they need. Typically in Indiana, I try not to make any splits past mid-September. I have made splits in 1st October, and they've made, and I've had some not make it, but typically mid-September. I'm in, I think, Zone 5B, so give you kind of an idea of what the region is here. Justin wants to know what I use to attach starter strips to the frame. Well, I use Manlake cleated top boards. You pull the cleat off and you just put the starter strip in there and pinch it with your finger and staple the cleat board back in. That's what I prefer. If you've got slotted top bars, you can cut the strips about 1.5 inches wide and just melt you some wax in a pan and take a small paintbrush and just paint down the sides of them. That'll work. Ricky Mills. I got a package a year ago. Excuse me. I wanted to buy a queen from another supplier for a split. Current queen is laying good and bees are hatching. How far do I need to move the split from the mother hive? All splits work better if you take them out of the yard. There's no ifs and buts about it. You won't get any drift out of them. So if you can take them down the road someplace, a couple miles for 5 days, and then you can bring them right back. And once they get used to that new location, 5 days, you can bring them right back and put them in the yard. That is the best way to make a split. But I've set splits right side beside each other, facing opposite directions, and I like to move the queen, the old queen, when I make the split, and give her most of the bees out of a box, because you have all the foragers in that box will drift back to the original hive, and she's not going to stop laying. She's going to keep on laying. She got enough bees, they'll be fine. The original box catches all the workers back, and you put a queen in there, and they ought to be rocking and rolling pretty quick. Jim Smith wants to know any idea when I got queens for sale. Well, I'm selling queens now, but I've got a pretty good waiting list. Hopefully, here in the next 3 weeks, I'm going to get caught up and have some spare queens. But at the present time, they're spoken for pretty far out. Alice from Hawaii. How long after a nuke starts laying do you wait before moving a hive several miles? I don't wait any time. If I wanted to move that hive, I would pin it up after dark and move it the next day. And if you're moving it in the same yard, I like to use bamboo. I got bamboo growing in the yard, and I just break a sprout of that over and put a brick on top of the hive and break it at a 90 and let it sit down in front of the entrance. So that way they reorientate. They know something's different. But you can put grass in there, sticks, whatever you want, just so they know that there's something different. And it typically, there'll be a few bees go back to the original location, but it typically okay. Ricky, when feeding dry pollen substitute, do you need to grind it up to make a powder, or will they break up the little clumps themselves? Well, I don't make my own pollen substitute. I use Manlake Ultra Bee, and the reason being on that, it's got all 10 amino acids in it that the bees need to make brood, If you're missing one of the 9, they can't make brood. So time you hunt all the stuff down and make it yourself, you have more money in just buying it. They sell in different size bags, but it's a little expensive, a 50-pound bag, and I run over 200 hives, and it'll last a year, so it's pretty good insurance. And I've tried making your own stuff up and have the ultra bee out there, and they won't even touch my stuff. They just let's tear up the ultra bee. So there's a big difference in it. Real pollen. Ricky wants to know about real pollen. I have never fed real pollen because I would be afraid. Pollen has a tendency to have a lot of diseases in it. You have to know where it's come from, and I don't recommend feeding pollen back to your bees unless it come out of your yard. How do you keep small hive beetles off the patties when you put them in? I'm in southwest Ohio, and in about a week I had beetles larvae. I only use pollen patties on new splits and on starter hives where I'm raising queen cells. They'll eat a half a patty, a starter hive will, because it's got a lot of bees in it. They'll eat a half a patty in 6 days. That's what it takes to get a cell capped. The best thing to do is just cut small pieces. If you're getting worms in it, and I don't recommend feeding it in the summertime to bigger hives. I'd feed dry outside the hive, but cut smaller squares. Just cut inch squares or inch by 2, whatever they'll eat in a couple of days, and that way the beetles won't take it over. The beetles are starting to come back. I've seen a couple this year. It's not too bad. The last couple of years, I've been pretty good on hive beetles. But the pollen patty will definitely draw hive beetles. If there's hive beetles in the box, it's like a magnet to it. That's where they'll go first. Carol wants to know how many queens I have in the incubator. Well, not right now. I think there's only 30 in there, but I can run as high as 115, I believe, at a time. Alice wants to know if I keep my bloodlines clean. No, they're all open-mated queens because I buy sometimes breeder queens and sometimes F1s, which the strains are pretty pure on the bloodlines, and usually those queens will not lay enough bees to keep a hive alive. That's how pure they are. And what I mean by that, if they're inbred, when the queen lays an egg in there, they know if it's inbred, and the bees will take it out of there. She may lay a whole perfect pattern, but I have seen it get down as little as 60% of the cells be viable because they pulled the eggs out of it. So you really don't want pure bloodlines for production hive. You want the hybridization. So run the queens as pure as you can and let them open mate, and you get the hybridize, and you get some super queens that way. We talked about swarms earlier. I mean, it's that time of year that you'll have primary swarms, and a lot of times they'll swarm out 2 or 3 more times secondary swarms to get the amount of bees out of that box they need. I talked a little earlier about honeybound. Right now, there's such a honey flow on here. Every time a bee hatches out, they throw nectar in it, and the queen doesn't have a place to lay. And that has a tendency to a queen not having a place to lay. That'll cause swarming too. So bees right now, they don't need that honey in that box. Go in that box, and if they got it capped, pull it out, extract it, whatever. Put it in the freezer, store it. If they don't have it capped, put another box on, and move the honey up to the top. Checkerboard some. I've been not even putting drawed comb in there now. Earlier I was, but I've been putting starter strips in so they can use some of that nectar up for drawing wax. You got to be real careful, as warm as it is now, about putting too much drawed comb, especially in a split. You don't want to put any more drawed comb in there than they got enough bees to cover, because the hive beetles will go out there and they'll establish themselves in that vacant comb that the bees are not taking care of, and then you won't see them, and in just a matter of a couple of days they'll destroy that hive. So definitely in the summertime, it's better to put starter strips. The bees will build it as they need it, and you don't have the trouble with the hive beetles taking over the hive. Alice, do secondary swarms show the same signs with lots of drone? Well, yeah, secondary swarms. I mean, they have the main one come out. Not all of them have secondary, but you might, in the next 3 days, get secondary swarms out of the same box. So you still have the drone comb in there from the original swarm. It ain't like it's 2 or 3 weeks down the road. It'll happen within a couple, 3 days if the weather's fit, if it's raining. And that's another thing about swarming. You get 4 or 5 days, you got some boxes that's really full of bees and they're thinking about swarming. You get 4 or 5 days, or even 2 or 3 days of a lot of rain, the first pretty day, they'll be out of that box. That's the day they're going to leave. I mean, they'll just about always, right after a couple of days of rain, they'll leave the box. Missy wants to know if I use the Swiffer sheets for beetles. I do not. I tried them at one time. It caught a lot of bees, or more bees than I wanted to catch, and it could catch your queen. If your queen gets caught, you've lost a queen. So I'm not a big fan of the Swiffer sheets. I forget what they're called, the straps that go down between the frames, beetle hotels or whatever they're called. They work pretty good. There's various things you can put in them. Some people use diatomaceous earth in them. Some use mineral oil. Some people use their own concoction of scents to try to get them down in there. They work fairly effective. 2 years ago, I put soil stabilization cloth around all my hives, 3 foot out, all the way around all the stands. And since I've done that, I haven't had hardly any trouble with hive beetles. Now, this year may be different, but when the larva hits, they can't go in the ground. They got to crawl 3 foot to get off of the end of the ground. And it seemed like the birds was doing a pretty good job about keeping them cleaned up. So, and if you got them really bad, the only thing I know to get that's legal for taking care of hive beetles, and it doesn't get them out of the hive. You got to get them out of the hive yourself. But you can spray Guard Star, and you water it in the ground after dark. It's Pyrithium is the active ingredient on it, and it's labeled for honeybees, and it'll take care of about 3 months of the hive beetles not being able to reproduce in the ground. So it won't get them out of the box, but it'll sure cut the numbers down coming back in once you get them taken care of. Missy wants to know if diatomaceous earth harms the bees. Oh, I think it would if they had access to it. I mean, they'll drag anything in for pollen and this, that, and the other. But all the beetle traps, it's down in the bottom. They can't get to it. It's not poisonous, but it's like little shards of silica, and it would probably grind their insides up if they ate it. But they use it for worming cattle and stuff and horses. So I mean, it's not poisonous. Johnson says hello. Hello, Jonathan. Like I say, the honeybound, you got to watch right now. The queen's got to have a place to lay. Honeybees are funny. You can have 2 deep brood boxes on there, and the queen really is full up, honeybound. Queen doesn't have a place to lay. You can have 6 honey supers on top of that. They'll still swarm. That has nothing to do with the swarming. She's got to have a place to lay, and she's not going up in the honey supers and lay. So you got to. I try not to leave them any honey in there till August. Maybe 1 frame honeys are open nectars. All I ever leave them in the hive. I try to keep it pulled out, and that's a job keeping it pulled out. But you make a lot more bees that way. You make a lot more honey. I just had my bees inspected this week, and the fatalities over the winter have been very high in the state of Indiana, as been all over the U.S. And people's got their own reasons why they think it was, but I've looked at several dead outs in the hundreds, and the one factor I'm seeing in all the dead outs is they have plenty of honey. I mean, dead out was still 8-10 frames of honey in there, but there's no pollen. Last year was a bad year for pollen, and there's absolutely 0 pollen in the hives. And bees got to have protein. The pollen's a protein for them. The sugar and nectar and honey, that's all carbohydrates. And you can live on soda pop for a while, but after a while, your body starts rejecting it. So they got to have the protein. Bill wants to know, hey Joe, what do you know about the Saskatraz queens? They're very winter hardy. I've heard some people say they was a little hot. And then I've had other people say they're not hot at all. So that may just be the actual strain of them you get. But they do winter nice, and they produce above average honey. Actually, I'm going to try some later in the year. I'm going to give my evaluation on it. The Canadian beekeeper runs a lot of Saskatraz up there, and he put a video on YouTube here last week, and he was going through one, and he'd take his hand and wave across the top of a box real quick, and they didn't even jump up off the frame, so they didn't look very hot to me. So what one person thinks a hot bee and what I think's a hot bee might be 2 different things. Missy, do you have an issue with birds eating your bees? If so, what would you suggest to do? We have bought about 20 twirling flowers from Dollar Tree and put them around. The birds, especially blue jays, they'll catch a few bees, but they're not going to hurt the population of bees. That's something I just don't worry about. You read all these books, and everybody says that a queen bee lays 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day. Well, on a small frame cell foundation, there's 9,200 cells on the side. I think there's 70 some hundred on standard 5.1. But anyway, they'll give them the benefit of the doubt. So say there's 8,000 label cells she's got on a sheet of wax. That's 16,000 cells, and she can only lay, say, 2,000 a day. It takes her 8 days to lay a frame up. Well, they hatch in 21 days. So at the very most that a queen could have would be 3.5 frames of brood. And you go in a box in a big, strong, double deep 8 or 10 frame, and they've got 7, 8, 10 frames of brood. So somebody that wrote the book don't know what they're talking about on how many. The queen basically lays as many eggs a day she needs to lay. If she's got plenty of workers, plenty of food, and there's a nectar flow on, I have no clue. I put a queen in a box 5 days ago, and she laid 3 full frames of drawed comb up in 5 days. So you're looking at 24,000 cells. So I don't know, that's a lot more than 2,000. Annie says she's got pollen feeders like I make up next to the hives. That idea didn't come from me. That comes from a friend of mine in Mississippi, Bryant Davis, and they work really well. Let's see, I got some relation on here. How you doing, Marita? I'm not trying to do too many of these question answers. Maybe one every month, month and a half. Just kind of people comes up with different situations in the yard. Try to give them an answer, and you always go to my YouTube channel, and I try to answer questions about all of them there also. But the YouTube channel is going to get big enough that I can't answer all of them. It's just physically impossible. I get several questions a day, and it's not showed any signs of slowing down. So if I don't get your question, just post it again, and maybe I'll get to it. Alice wants to know how long you can leave the pollen in outside feeders. I actually feed 306 pollen, leave it out there for them 365 days a year. Natural pollen only lasts about 30 days, and it loses its potency. And that's why the bees, you'll see some of the bees make bee bread where they put honey over the top of the pollen, seal it off, and mix it in there. They get about 60 to 70 days when they do that. So it starts losing its potency pretty quick. The man-made stuff doesn't lose its potency quite as quick. So like right now, they're not eating any pollen because there's a super flow on here. I've not got much out for them, just keep a little in there at a time. And here in about the next 5-6 weeks, they'll start coming into dearth, and they will look like they're swarming on them, and they'll eat 2 or 3 pounds a day. Todd says, I have a queen coming in a couple of days to try to boost my hive numbers. I plan on pulling some frames from 2 hives to put in the 5-frame nuke. What is the best way to do this? Actually, when I make splits like that, I like to pull a frame. If I've got 5 hives, I like to pull a frame out, a different frame out of each hive. It seems to confuse the bees because nobody's related to each other, and they seem to have less drift if you leave it in the same yard. we talked about earlier, the best way to do it is move it a mile or two down the road for 5 days. That's the least amount of drift. If you didn't have it stuck real tight, you could pin them up for a couple days with a screen front. And there'll be a few bees dies in there. They get agitated. You can take a hive, a nuke box that's living in there and just packed, and you lock them up in there, and they start getting frustrated, and they'll overheat in just a few hours. But typically, if it's not, 3-frame split in a 5-frame box, you can put some screen over the front and give them plenty of ventilation. And the key to that is to open them up after dark. When you open them up after dark, the bees will come out of the box, get all over the front of the box and a little bit on the ground, but they don't fly. And once they crawl back in the box, they feel like that's home. And I found that that's the least amount of drift I can have. Keep them in the same yard. Wayne says 1 or 2 10-frame boxes for brood in Georgia. Well, I think if you're running hives for honey production, I think a double deep brood box essential. Have a lot of bees. A lot of bees make a lot of honey. You can take a hive that's got 100,000 bees in it and divide it and put 2 hives with 50. Them 250s won't make as much as the one hive with 100. They just got everything clicking. 10-frame box, I don't run any. It's hard to get them to draw the outside frames, and it's just bees by nature build up, not horizontal. So I would prefer an 8-frame box and a double. Now, if I was living in colder climates like I do here, I like to shake in October, shake all the bees out in a 2-frame brood box, shake all the bees out of the second box down into the first box, and put a sugar board on top of them, pack them up for the winter, make them real strong. In the bottom box, they ain't gonna swarm. They're that late in the year, they ain't got no place to go. The queen's starting to shut down, not laying much brood. And the theory behind that is, of course, you got a lot more bees in one box, so they can control the temperature better, and they'll keep the whole box for a lot of the winter at 95 degrees in there, 90, 95. Whereas if they're trying to heat 2 boxes, it's a lot harder, and the whole box won't stay that warm. It gives them a little chance to build up earlier in the spring. They can control the heat in the spring, and they'll build up quicker with the one box on there, especially if you go through winter and you need to take that second box off in the spring if you don't want to take it off in the fall. And like I say, bees start at the bottom in the wintertime and work their way up. And I put a big, thick candy board on, or sugar board on top. That way, on a single frame box, the bees can never be without honey. If they're starting up and it turns cold and they can't move the cluster, they'll end up on the sugar and they still got a place to lay. Well, when it warms up a little, they'll come back down, move over, and start up again. And it seems just to work better. And of course, you always get that thing where the queen's laid a quarter size circle of brood in there, and it's turned off cold, and the bees will not leave brood, and the whole cluster will go down there and cluster on a quarter size patch of brood and starve to death with honey within inches of them. It's just some of the things, you can't help that. It just happens. Let me see here how many questions I missed. I've rattled on. Okay. Langford wants to know how you know when your nuke's ready to split. Well, there's a real good indication in there if they put in a lot of drone comb, because they're going to split they're going to go to the woods and do it themselves. One of the first things you'll notice if a nuke gets overcrowded is they'll put a lot of burrcomb on top of the frames and start building it up there. And that means they're overcrowded. Hanging out on the front of the box, so many bees in there they can't get in. That's a good indication it's time to split. And I'm a renegade, so I split when I want to split. It don't matter how many bees is in there. Todd, we're getting a lot of rain in Georgia. My small splits are going through their stores quickly. Guess I'll start feeding. You always on a split. I like to always put feed and a pollen patty inside the box on splits just for that reason. If it goes to raining, they'll back up real quick if they don't have, because they don't have any pollen stores in there to keep them going. Kim wants to know what's the easiest way to introduce a virgin that has emerged in a new nuke. Typically a virgin, I've tried it a bunch of different ways, and there's no 100% way. They're going to kill some they don't. I found the best way to do is just open the top of the box up on the frames and pick the furthest corner you can in the box away from the most bees. If the bees are mainly in the front, go to the back of the box and set her right in the corner and shut it up. It'll work better than 50% of the time. It ain't 100%. Bill says I made some splits and put them in 3-frame mating nukes. They have made cells. Can I move them to a regular 5-frame nuke before she hatches? I'm getting ready to leave for a couple weeks and don't want them to swarm. Bill, I wouldn't be too worried about it, because when you put them in a bigger box, you'll slow them down some. The cells are not hatched yet. She's going to be 3 to 5 days after they hatch before she flies out and mates. And then it's going to be 3 to 14 days before she starts laying. So your 2-week vacation, they should be fine. Yeah, Holly's talking about not getting them to not draw them frames out on the outside of the box. Just this warm weather, there's no danger of chill brood. Just take them outside frames and go over a couple of frames and put you one in, and go on the other side, go in a couple of spaces and put another in. You can get them to draw them out. Try to move your honey to the outside against the walls. Scott wants to know how long you keep feeding a package install. I never take the feed off a package the first year. I feed them because I'm trying to make a lot of bees, and I may take that package and split it 5 or 6, 8 times. So make a lot of bees. If you feed 1-to-1 sugar or less, they will put it in the comb, but they won't cap 1-to-1 sugar or less. 2-to-1 they will cap. So people worry about sugar in their honey. In the summertime, if they've got plenty of stores in there for winter, which I don't let them have, I'll take it out and give it back to them in the fall. But if you got plenty of honey to put back on them, feed them 1/2-to-1. Save your money on the sugar. 1/2-to-1 gives them enough carbohydrates to stay busy and not eat on their stores for winter, and they won't put it in your honey, so you don't have to worry about having sugar honey. Right now, I hope everybody's treating for mites. This day and age, you can't raise bees without treating for mites. you hear these people say they do this and they do that. Mites have so many viruses now since 2013 when they brought the mites in from New Zealand, and you just got so many viruses that the mites carry that you've got to treat, or you won't have bees. You just never get them through the winter. So be religious on however you want to treat. I'm not going to tell you how to treat. I treat with oxalic acid vaporized, but you got to pick your own way. There's more organic ways to treat, some less effective than others. I mean, wintergreen, put in not a smoker, it's a fogger. I mean, it's a slow kill. It's only about 50%. It's not good enough for me. Then you got the mite away strips, which I use. I don't use chemicals like that in my hive. I just don't like doing it. But you definitely got to treat for mites. And I said, well, you got your honey supers on. Well, the law on most of them, other than mite away strips, something you got to leave in there for 5 to 6 weeks, says you can't to treat with honey supers on. Well, pull your honey supers off, treat, put them back on. Doesn't say you got to leave them off for 2 days. It doesn't say you have to leave them off for 10 seconds. It just says they got to be off. So don't let that stop you from treating your hives for mites. That's the number one worst mistake beekeepers make, is not keeping a real close eye on their mite count. And you go through there after you've treated, go in there in a couple of weeks, check, do a sugar shake or an alcohol wash, and check for the mite counts. Make sure what you're doing for mites is working. Don't assume I treated, everything's all right. Assume will get you in a lot of trouble. Your bees won't make it through the winter. Yeah, Jonathan just kind of asked a question about should I feed with honey supers on. In Europe, they oxalic acid with honey supers on, but it's not legal in the United States. Just go up there and pop the supers off and set them on the ground, treat them, put your honey supers back on. And everybody making splits right now. I know a lot of people, there's flows in a lot of the country, bringing in a lot of pollen, a lot of nectar. You can get by with making splits in the springtime with a lot of drawed comb and don't have any problem. But it's starting into this next month, June. You really got to be careful. Don't give them any more drawed comb. You think you're helping them out, but don't give them any more drawed comb than you got enough bees to cover. The hive beetles will infest the combs to the outside. And typically when you go inspect, you don't even pay any attention. You pull that frame out and you set it down, and you go look where the bees are at. And you'll miss it, and they will annihilate that hive. They keep building on them outside frames, and they'll just come in there and all at once, no matter 2 days, and ruin that hive. They'll be gone. Once they putrefy the honey, the bees won't stay in it. They'll leave. Let me see here. Holly wants, what do you feed your nukes the first year? I've been feeding mine 1 deep frame feeder each, but they burn through the feeder in 2 or 3 days. I hate to open it up and too often to refill it. I typically only feed every 3rd day. I use high top feeders, not frame feeders, because you can lose a queen. A queen will crawl down in there and get drowned and lose a queen. And the big drawback, like you say, on frame feeders is you got to open the hive up to feed them. On a high top feeder, I don't have to do that. And I feed them small amounts. Typically, a nuke, I won't feed them but a quart every 3 days. That's enough to keep them busy without, even in the summertime, without eating their stores up for the winter. Bill wants to know if you ought to treat your splits. Absolutely. Treat all of them. I went through the yard last week and treated splits and starter hives and everything. Of course, I'll catch a lot of flack about this, but you always hear these treatment-free beekeepers. All there are mite bombs. If you got a neighbor that's a treatment-free beekeeper, you're going to have trouble with mites all the time. Your bees is going over there and rob on their hives because they're going to be sick with mites, and so they're going to be weak and they're going to rob. And you can treat in 4 days, you've got the same mite load again. And all them drones from your neighbors, a drone is accepted in any hive. Drones is like a vagabond. They just move around hive to hive, and they're notorious for carrying the mites in. Everybody needs to treat. See if we can get some of this under control. It's kind of like the heartworms in dogs. Here 20 years ago, you couldn't even raise a dog for a year if you didn't treat for heartworms, he'd die. And now everybody treats for heartworms, and heartworms is almost unheard of anymore. So hopefully we can get the numbers down to where it's not too problematic on our bees. Jonathan, you're welcome. He said he appreciated the question and answer. You can't get on the paid ones. I'll never ask for any money. It just won't happen. I want to give my knowledge out there to help the beekeeper. I know when I first started, I didn't know what the difference in foundations was. I didn't know what size foundation to buy for a frame. And it's pretty intimidating, but I hope that these question and answers help a lot of people. And like I say, nobody knows all there is to know about bees. I learn something every day on the bees, especially when you get to run a bunch of hives. You notice things in the bee yard that the backyard guy with 4 or 5 hives would never catch. But I see it, and you see it one day and you don't pay no attention to it. And the next day you go back out and you see the same thing again. The next day, well, you start paying attention. It draws it to your attention, and you can learn a whole lot about bees. One thing, you open a hive up, no matter what size hive it is, and you open that lid up and a bunch of bees jump up on them top frames and throw their butts in there and start fanning. 9 times out of 10, that hive doesn't have a queen. They're calling the queen. Something's happened to her. You rolled her. She died of old age. Something's happened to the queen, but that's a telltale sign of no queen in the box. And a lot of people, you don't hear anybody talk about it. Mike wants to know screen bottom boards versus solid. I use solid bottom boards, but they winter way up in the north with screen bottom boards wide open all year long. I just prefer them. I don't know if I don't think one's better than the other. The screen bottom does have some drawbacks. When you put the slider tray in the bottom of it, it gives a lot of places underneath there, under the wire, that hive beetles can multiply, and the wax moths, and the bees can't get to them to clean them out. That's one drawback. And they have a tendency to have a little more problems with moisture than a solid bottom board. For instance, if you get big heavy dew on in the mornings late in the fall, or any time of year, but late in the fall especially, and then that sun comes out there and it's going to get up 70 degrees, it starts hitting that grass with all that dew on there, and all that moisture that comes up off that dew vaporizes and goes right in your hive. And it caused some problems on that, but they both work. I don't know if they first come out with them for mites. Do I think they help the mite count? Nah, it's so minute that if you're doing it for mites, it's kind of in Wonderland. If some people treat for mites with powdered sugar, and powdered sugar is pretty effective if you do it every week. But then you get into the problem with drawing ants. The powdered sugar, you got to get something to catch it when it falls out. And then screen bottom boards, if you're doing something like that, would be a must. And catch the sugar and throw it in the trash can so you didn't draw ants. But, powdered sugar, you can treat every week or two with powdered sugar or just with a flour sieve and shake it all over the bees, and they'll clean themselves up. And in the process, they pull the mites off and they fall through the screen bottom boards. It will work. Alice wants to know how long I've kept bees. Well, I had some bees when I was a kid and didn't know a whole lot about them. I've just been keeping bees commercially for 5 years. I'm a pretty fast learner. Dad always told me that a dumb man never learns from a mistake. A smart man learns from his mistakes, and a wise man learns from other people's mistakes. And I try to be a wise man a lot of times. It don't always happen, but I try to be. But, man, I hope everybody's having a good year. The bees seem to be really growing fast, and if a guy had established hives, I keep these broke down here in this nuke yard that they don't make any honey, or they make a lot of honey, but there's not enough big hives. And big hives, as much honey as they're bringing in, ought to be make a surplus of honey this year for everybody. The main thing is, though, right now, even though if you're making honey, pull that honey out of them brood boxes down there and give that queen someplace to lay and keep them going. Like I say, the weather's been really messed up this year, and a lot of things that should have bloomed early is blooming with the stuff that's supposed to be blooming now, so they've got a surplus of nectar and pollen. But especially in this area here towards the end of next month, June, things are going to start tightening up. Don't be afraid to put feed on your honey hives. Keep them from, you go out there and you've got 5 supers on and you think, man, they got all the honey they need. I'll have excess honey. You don't feed, and they had maybe got a drought this year. You go out there and they've ate through 3.5 boxes of your honey. They're going to eat it to survive. So give them something to eat so they don't take your honey away from you. Alice wants to know how much honey I keep back. On the winter nukes here, I try to, a couple ways I do winter. I'll try to give them a couple full drawn out frames of pollen or honey on the outside of the boxes. And the queen will quit laying late in the fall, and the goldenrod comes on. They'll fill quite a bit of the other 3 frames up with honey. And then on some of them, I put a medium box on top of that with 5 frames of honey. And more of the times than often, I just put a shim board, 2-inch shim board up there, and put 2 inches of granulated sugar on them. And that's all they need to go through the winter. Sam wants to know if 30-day-old queens will still build queen cells. Absolutely. Nurse bees, young bees, do a lot better job of raising brood and queen cells due to their, whatever the gland is on the top of their head from making raw jelly, produces a lot more of it. But a bee can revert back to any job that's had. He can't do it quite as well as he did when he was young, but he can do it. You think about it. You come out of winter and all the bees in that box is basically 4 months old, and they start making brood in the spring. They ain't got any nurse bees to take care of the brood, so the first hatch of brood is all taken by care of bees, but it's 4 months old. So yes, they'll make queen cells. They will. If you was grafting into a box of old bees like that, they wouldn't make a lot of cells for you. Typically, put a 10 frame or 10 or 15 strip of cells on them, might make 2 or 3 versus all 15 of them. But yes, they will. They can make queen cells. Bill says his supers are about half full. Yeah, they're really bringing it in. You really got to watch close in your brood boxes now. You get a good frame of pattern out there and you got some brood hatching out. Look down in there. See if there's an egg laid back in it or empty. Mine right now is really just filling it up with nectar right in it. Queen doesn't have a chance to get back to it. And that'll cause them to swarm at a certain later time if you don't have a place to lay. Everybody must have caught up and know everything. Teach me something. No questions. That's just like splits right now. We're getting close to the time that the one frame splits are going to have to stop doing it. As the year progresses, you got to get stronger. I go to 2 frame splits in the 2 frame boxes, and then I'll go to in July, 1st of July, I'll go into 3 frame splits in a 5 frame box, and sometimes in August you got to do 5 frame splits. It's to keep the hive beetles under control, and wax moths and the robin. Something that once the dirt starts, the robin will start. And you can stop a little of the robin by open feeding. 5-gallon bucket feeders. Don't feed it close to your hive. Go out there 100, 150 yards or so away from your hive. Get away from your hive. They'll find it and feed out that way. That seems to stop a lot of robin. The only bad thing about that, you're feeding a lot of the wild bees and you're feeding the neighbor's bees. Kim wants to know how I manage the nectar in the brood box. Typically, I will run a two deep brood chamber, and I'll pull all the open stuff up into the second box, and all the capped and all the open, all I can get up into the next box, and then I'll give her checkerboard, either drawn comb, depending on how strong the hive is, drawn comb or starter strips down in the other box. And by the time she gets in trouble again, they should have the upper box, some of it capped where you can pull it out, spin it, put it in a freezer, whatever you want to do with it. Eat it yourself, save it for the bees. You can't just pull it out and leave it in the house. The wax moths will get in it and ruin it. You got to keep it in a refrigerator or someplace, or freeze it. Thaw it out. The wax moths will ruin it. That's what I got to do next week. Everything I got out here is honey bound. I've got to pull a bunch of frames and put a bunch of boxes on. Sam's asking a question here. I have an 8-frame deep with a 3-week-old package, 7 frames drawn out. Should I wait for queen cell or do a walkaway split? Well, if they've only been in there 3 weeks, they're just now getting their first hatch of brood. It takes 21 days for that queen to get their first hatch out. So you're going to see a big decline in that box over the next 3 or 4 days if it ain't already started. I wouldn't even think about splitting that box until they've had at least 7 days of hatch out of that queen. Get some new bees in there. Back to your original question, I never compact a hive and make them make queen cells. I have found that when you do that, the queen will swarm out of that box at least 50% of the time before the queen cells are ever capped. And that's a big mistake that the beginner makes. They open their box up and they got queen cells everywhere and they start mashing queen cells. Wrong thing to do. The queen may be already gone. If you cut all the queen cells down, they have no way to make a new queen. Before you, as a beginner or even as a guy's been doing a while, when you got queen cells, you go in there, you find your queen first. Make sure she's still in there before you take care of the queen cells. Cut them out and make splits with them, or just destroying them, whatever you're wanting to do if you're not wanting to make splits. So that's a big mistake a lot of people make. Well, I just been running these things about an hour. I appreciate all you guys coming. I'll post this up on YouTube also. It should be on my Facebook page. And I appreciate everybody coming, all the questions. I hope I helped some people out, and we'll do another one here in a month or so. Thanks for watching.